was on the afternoon that Inspector Holliday of the RSPCA, Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, rang me. Mr. Harriet, he said, I would like you to come and see an animal with me, a cruelty case. Right. What is it? A dog, and it's pretty grim. A dreadful case of neglect. He gave me the name of a row of old brick cottages down by the river and said he would meet me there. Holliday was waiting for me as I pulled up in the back lane behind the houses. He's in here. He led the way towards one of the doors in the long, crumbling wall. A few curious people were hanging around, and with a feeling of inevitability, I recognized a gnome-like brown face. Trust Mrs. Donovan, I thought, to be among those present at a time like this. Holliday went over to a ramshackle wooden shed right at the back. A dog was sitting quietly.
Now, here the author has introduced another character, that is the Inspector Holliday. So one afternoon, as Mr. Harriet was having his lunch, the Inspector Holliday of RSPCA rang him up. Here, rang him up means phoned him. And RSPCA stands for Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So what did Holliday say to Mr. Harriet? Did he shout at him over the phone? Did he arrest him for not taking care of the animals? Or what did he do? Here there is conversation over the phone between Mr. Harriet and Inspector Holliday. He said to him, Mr. Harriet, I want to come with me to see an animal, a cruelty case. Mr. Harriet said, that's right, sir. And what happened to an animal? The inspector said, it's a case of dog. It's pretty grim to say. Here pretty means very or quiet, and grim means sad or gloomy. It's dreadful case of negligence. Here dreadful means very serious case. How people are so careless, how negligent they are to a dog, to the animals. Harriet asked him, where did this happen? The inspector told him, the dog is neglected in the old brick cottage. Here cottage means small house. It is near the river, and the inspector told him to meet him there only. The inspector was waiting for Mr. Harriet near the brick cottage. As Mr. Harriet arrived there, as he pulled up lane, here pulled up means stopped. As Harriet stopped there, he found Holliday waiting for him. After Mr. Harriet reached the big cottage, the inspector told him, "There is a dog that is neglected," and he took him inside long crumbling wall. Here, crumbling means the wall was broken into pieces. As both of them went inside the cottage, they found some people were simply hanging around there without feeling for dog. Here, hanging around means they were staying there without doing any work. The author says Mr. Harriet noticed and identified a woman among those people who were hanging around inside the cottage. She had gnome-like brown face. Here, gnome-like means a person who had small pointed brown face. Remember, we have seen walnut face in the first paragraph. So it was like that. It resembled. So Mr. Harriet was able to recognize her, and perhaps Mrs. Donovan was also present among those people who were staying in the cottage. She is staying here carelessly after death of her terrier dog, Mr. Harriet thought himself. The fact that she was really inside the cottage and neglected the dog. Let's see whether she was also really present among those people. So, here, the author has introduced another poor dog after the death of Rex. That is Roy, that is not taken care. The inspector moved to ramshackled wooden shed. Here, ramshackled means disorder, poorly. So inside the cottage there was a shed, and back of the shed that poor dog was sitting quietly. There the poor dog was found.
I didn't notice him immediately because of the gloom and because of the smell in the shed started me coughing. But as I drew closer, I saw that he was a big animal, his collar secured by a chain to a ring in the wall. I had seen some thin dogs, but this advanced emaciation reminded me of my textbooks on anatomy. Nowhere else did the bones of the pelvis, face and rib cage stand out with such horrifying clarity. A deep, smooth out hollow in the earth floor showed where he had lain, moved about, in fact, lived for a very long time.
So here I means the author Mr. Harriet. So here he didn't notice the dog because smell came from the shed and he began to cough. As a lover of animals, he didn't go back because of smell, but he went closer to dog and he found that dog was big. The dog's collar was secured in the wall by a chain. Here secured means tied. Dog was tied by a chain. The author Harriet says that he had seen something dogs, but he had never seen such an advanced emaciation. Here, emaciation means the dog was very thin and weak because of illness or lack of food. He said that he had never seen such a terrible state, such a terrible situation of a dog. The bones of face, rib, and large bones were horrible to see. It was very terrible looking at such a condition of poor dog. The author was reminded about his textbook on anatomy. Here, anatomy means a branch of science that concerns with body structure of humans, animals, and other living organisms. The place where Roy was tied was deep. He was underground. He had no chance to see the world like any other animals, like any other dogs. This shows that the poor dog Roy had been laid for very long time.
The sight of the animal had a stupefying effect on me. I only half took in the rest of the scene. Look at his back end, Holliday muttered. I carefully raised the dog from his sitting position. The hind quarters were a welter of pressure sores. There were similar sores along the sternum and ribs. The coat, which seemed to be a dull yellow, was matted and caked with dirt. The inspector spoke again. I don't think he's ever been out of here. He's only a young dog, about a year old. But I understand he's been in this shed since he was an 8-week-old pup. Somebody out in the lane heard a whimper, or he'd never have been found.
There is still conversation between Mr. Harriet and the inspector. So the author inspector spoke to Holliday, the inspector. He said he had stupefying effect. Here, stupefying means he was shocked to see the bad condition of the dog. Then the Holliday told to Mr. Harriet, look at his back. The dog was sitting quietly there. So Mr. Harriet lifted the dog up very carefully, as he was weak and fragile and feeble. When he raised the dog from sitting position, perhaps for a long time the dog had never moved from the same place. So what did Harriet notice after he raised the dog carefully? What did Mr. Harriet see? He found that dog's hindquarters were welter of sores. Here, hindquarter means bones on buttock. Here, welter means large and sore means wound. So dog's bone on his buttock had big wound. He had big wound on his buttock due to sitting for long time. The dog could not stand up as he was very ill and weak. The dog had full of wound on his body. He had big wound along his sternum. Here sternum means the breastbones. His rib also had big wound. At the same time his fur or coat or hair was matted and caked with dirt. Because he was not given bath. He was never given bath for a long time. Here matted means dog's hair had formed with thick mass, and caked means dog's hair or fur was covered with thick layer, and therefore, in fact, he looked really terrible.
I felt a tightening of the throat and sudden nausea, which wasn't due to the smell. It was the thought of this patent animal sitting starved and forgotten in the darkness, and filled for a year. I looked again at the dog and saw in his eyes only a calm trust. Well, Inspector, I hope you are going to throw the book at whoever's responsible, I said.
Here, there is a continuation of dialogue between the inspector and Mr. Harriet, the author himself. So here, again, the inspector spoke to Harriet. He said, I think this poor dog had never got chance to go out of this shed. I think he is only of 1 year old. I think he had been here since he was 2 months old puppy. Again the author said he felt nausea looking at the miserable condition of the dog, not because of bad smell that was coming from dog, but due to starvation and carelessness of dog for 1 year. Here, starve means to die out of hunger or lack of food, and nausea means you feel like vomiting but you don't vomit in fact. There is still conversation between Harriet and Holliday as they looked at the dog. Then again Mr. Harriet told to Holliday, Sir, I hope you would really throw the book to him, whoever is the owner of that dog. Here, throw the book means to punish the owner for not taking care of the dog.
Holliday granted, oh, there won't be much done. The owner's definitely simple lives with his mother, who hardly knows what's going on either. I've seen the fellow, and it seems he threw in a bit of food when he felt like, and that's about all he did. They'll fine him and stop him from keeping an animal in the future, but nothing more than that. I see. I reached out and stroked the dog's head, and he immediately responded by resting a paw on my wrist. There was a pathetic dignity about the way he held himself erect, the calm eyes regarding me friendly and unafraid. Well, you'll let me know if you want me in court.
Here, still, both of them are having dialogue. Here, seeing the condition of dog, the inspector granted. What is granted? It means he made loud noise. No, I can't punish him. I can't arrest him. Why did he say so? He said this because the owner of the dog was an ordinary person. Nothing much can be done, he said. The owner lives with his mother. He does not know what is going on here. Holliday said to Mr. Harriet, I have seen the owner of the dog Rex. When he felt like giving a little food to dog, he gave. Otherwise, he has done nothing for Rex. Holliday said, I can't fine him, I can't punish him, but probably the poor owner of dog may be fined in the future. And also he wants to be allowed to keep the animals in future. That's it. Then the author said, I understand, sir. Now the author, Mr. Harriet, stroked the head of dog. Here stroke means Mr. Harriet moved his hand over the head of the dog gently. So what happened? So the dog put his paw on wrist of author as if it was the best touch for dog by Harriet. It was a friend touch. It was a friendly touch of dog, but his condition was pathetic. Here pathetic means the dog held the wrist of author, made him feel even more pity for dog. And then the author told to Inspector, sir, please inform me if you want me to come to the court. This is enough for today's class.